So about me, I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, work for Target. I'm a father of 5, a grandfather to 2, born in Delaware. I don't find many other people that are born in Delaware, so that's a little bit of a novelty, I guess, for me. And actually living in Minnesota, but moving from Arizona, I've lived in climates where the delta in temperatures over 170 degrees Fahrenheit, which that isn't something that a lot of people can say. So a little more about me. I've worked at Target since pretty much 2000-ish. There was a little bit of time that I wasn't at Target since 2000. Before that, I was at Chase Bank, and then prior to that, tons of kitchen jobs. And that's not a test kitchen plug. It's just, it was a lot of kitchen work. So as far as the current role, I'm a lead engineer in our infrastructure operations space at Target. I get to work with a lot of folks on, I don't know if we're calling it legacy or heritage or classic, but some of the older type systems that we have in place, but then also working with teams on being able to do things in new ways. And with that, and a title that my boss gave me, which is a little bit of a little more tongue-in-cheek, is Minister of Culture at Target around DevOps. So I kind of like to throw that out there every so often. I'm big into the systems development aspect and systems thinking, and try to really advocate for when people are looking at ways to solve problems, is to take a look at the life cycle driven process. It can become very easy to sort of focus in on the current challenge of today and use something that will fix today's problem. But it really, if you start to look at either scale or the time it takes to try to life cycle that particular solution, like in 5 years' time, it can start to change some of the inputs and outputs of what it is that you would actually deliver. And if anyone was at the keynote, or I'm sure many people are at the keynote, this is one good way to not be a chop to the person that's going to take your job and in 5 years have to figure out how to life cycle the thing that you built. So I try to advocate on those types of things. Studier of lean. I'm a big, I really evangelize Genchi Genbutsu. So if you're into lean, go and see where the work's being done. I think this really is a place where, especially if you provide a service to somebody else, being able to actually go and sit with them while they use your service to see how other people actually make use of it is a big deal. There's also, of course, Kaizen, Kaiban, all those Kanban, those types of things. And I don't know if this is really a phrase, but Michael Ducey has got the whole goat farm thing, and I love the fact that that's sort of a term, to be a goat. Because that's certainly one thing that when you think about what that means and having an understanding of the breadth and depth of all the things around IT, it's certainly something to aspire to, or at least I aspire to do that. Some of the past roles for myself, lots of integration, so file-based, message-based, web services, ETL type work, telephony engineer. I don't know if anyone has had to deal with, running T1 cables through sewers and attics, but that's what I used to have to do. So ITSM governance, let's get to the point. What are we talking about? There are definitions from an ITIL perspective around ITSM governance. But one thing that I really like is that this Axelos, they have this ITIL glossary, and the thing that they focus in on are the outcomes of ITSM as opposed to like the actual definition of ITSM. And I really like it because it really revolves around some of the things that are up on the board here. And that's around the quality of the deliverable, meeting the needs of the customers, and then applying an appropriate mix of people, process, and technology. These become really important aspects. And why, might you ask? Why do I get amped up sometimes about these things? Not that you actually asked me, but I'm delighted you did, at least on my slide. Because I see that there's a lot of DevOps correlations that are directly tied to the outcomes of ITSM governance. And around this, these are sort of these 3 ways that at Target that we talk about. Very much inspired and akin to Gene Kim's Phoenix Project of the 3 ways, but it pulls away a little bit of the roles and starts to talk about things like from an empathy perspective that really focuses in on the systems thinking and understanding end to end, but making sure that people are in place to be able to have an understanding and decouple emotion from data and be able to see end to end how we start to deliver components like one-piece flow, those types of things. Collaboration, being able to have an understanding of who you need to work with in order to introduce change. And then that experiential learning, of being in a position where you can actually start to test those things out and be able to see who it is that it's affecting become really important aspects to that. So there's 3 takeaways from this talk that I'm hoping to get through without either running out of time or boring everyone to death. And that is around ITSM governance. It's a really key differentiator for enterprises around enterprise infrastructure as code movement. And that's really a focus around the quality aspects of this. There's also then, if there's too much governance and it's painful, it actually becomes this obstacle for infrastructure as code, and it'll be more ignored than acknowledged. And this is where there's the notion of then of making sure that we're meeting the needs. And honestly, code is going to win in these kind of conversations because we can do a lot of things with code today, deep into technology stacks that we didn't necessarily have either the gumption or appetite to do in the past. And then of course there's that aspect of really leveraging in on some CI and CD principles to talk about the appropriate mix of the people, process, and technology. Because with CI, CD, we're able to get into some of those things. So in this first takeaway, it being a key differentiator, there's an aspect here of making sure when we talk about quality, that for quality, we're talking about consistency and we're talking about predictability. So if we can go through an easy to flow chart, we can start to see if we go down a path. Many times in ITSM governance, there's this notion of having to capture lots of information, but not necessarily getting the output that's expected. One thing that we work through within in this, and we work through around the quality aspect, is making sure that from an infrastructure as code practice, we're able to do things that actually show and highlight some of the different areas. Because honestly, the customers are going to be first when it comes down to understanding what the quality is. And so from a very brief definition here, quality is the measurement in the form of a consistent, predictable result against similar kinds of products or common types. So when we have our customers, and to one degree or another, we all have some sort of customer, when they have expectations about what it is that's going to be delivered, and we're able to provide consistency and predictability, then we're able to start to leverage that as data to be able to then make improvements against the quality. Many times this is going to be what the criteria is from a customer view is based upon defining what that success or fail criteria is for quality. But in many cases, when we go down the path that we have in some places with ITSM governance is trying to establish and understand way too much in trying to fit too much into a change release. That makes it very difficult for us to understand how we're actually going through and iterating against success for what we think it should look like and for success of what our customers look like. And this will be one of the first things. So when we talk about the quality aspect, one thing at Target that we've gotten into is a little bit of the big release management. And I can't see folks, but do folks have like a release cycle? Like a release every quarter, like 3 a year. Not that I can see you, but, oh, thanks, Mike. Like I said, I can only see right here. So in some cases, what we have are these really big release cycles, right? And with these big release cycles, what happens is as the more things that are going into this release, and here's like release 1, release 2, release 3, what we end up with is release 1, there's so much stuff that's going on in this release, and there's so many different teams that are adding different components, that risk starts to actually grow as we try to do something like actually deploy it. So when we talk about trying to go through and understand and make sure that customers are providing us, we're getting the right information from a customer perspective, is to be able to start to drop these down into smaller waves. And with these smaller waves, we have more checkpoints and being able to actually go through and see. They're actually providing quality to our customers. So takeaway number 2, the obstacle to getting this done. As you can see with this picture, if ITSM governance is actually used as an obstacle, the bold and clever will look for workarounds around the process. And just looking at this particular one, even if there was a lock on the drawer, there's not really a whole lot of security there. There's not a whole lot there that's actually providing much value. In looking at things like this, and I'm going to jump over to the board. I've provided this analogy a couple times at Target, and it seems to resonate pretty well. Do folks go to coffee shops? Not any particular coffee shop. Woohoo! Thank you. One thing that when we look at ITSM governance and the way that at least for Target, some of the things that we've done to implement it to make sure that we have all the T's crossed and the I's dotted, is people go through and they have to submit a change request, for example. And when they submit the change request, it may be for something that just seems so trivial of like, give me a server. And it could be a Linux server with a little bit of storage, a non-user account, that type of thing. And what sometimes will take place, well actually every time from our perspective, is that we have this notion of these lanes. And so in each of the lanes is actually a component of the request. But instead of it being a one-piece flow where we kind of work from what the customer needs, for example, if it's a Tomcat server or if it's a database server, it's, well, what type of server? It's a Linux server, okay, but it's not necessarily answering the question of what's the business driver or the business value that we're delivering. So the analogy on the coffee shop is, imagine going into your favorite coffee shop and you get in line and you say, hot cocoa. I want a medium hot cocoa. And the response that you get is, this is the cup line. You're like, but I just want a cup of hot cocoa, some whipped cream, little sprinkles, right? I mean, are there any cocoa drinkers? Okay. So you go in, you walk into the shop, and you walk into what is the cup line. And you get your cup. And you're really disappointed, and now you have to go to the next line. Next line isn't really marked, it's not really clear, it just says liquid. And you go up to it, and they're like, no, this is the coffee line, you actually need the next line over. And this is some of the types of experiences that folks were getting when they would say, I need a Linux server. Because there wasn't that necessarily enough of that information about things like, well, how much storage, the type of non-user account, service IDs, those types of things. And so there was this degree of frustration of, okay, so let me go into the next line, but I go into the coffee line, that's not the right line. So then I end up having to go over to the cocoa line. And by the time I get over here, this line is able to pump out like 5 units a minute, whatever the unit of measure is you want to manage. The cocoa line, I get filled up, but I'm actually sitting in line because they can only do 1 cup per minute. And so it's that next station in I just need a Linux server. Well, I can give you 10 Linux servers an hour, but I can only provision storage to 1 every 2 hours. It's this type of situation that we sort of get into. And so many times you end up with people that end up trying to work around that. But what we've done is, and here's a bit of a form that just kind of shows sort of this backwards notion of fill out a change request, and on that change request, you're going to submit tasks to different teams to manage the provisioning of the overall change request. The thing is that if you don't have enough information to tell like the network provisioning team how to provision to the network, then it's going to come back as they're going to reject the change task request that you submitted for the change. So in order to get the change request in this type of provisioning mode, with this type of ITSM governance, you have to know server, storage, network, provisioning, access provisioning, those types of things, in order to get the change tasks to all those different teams accepted, so you can get the change request approved, so you can actually try to implement the change. It's kind of like going into a store and saying, I just want a cup of cocoa, and not being able to get that, and having to jump around. So some of the things that we've done with infrastructure as code has said, you know what, instead of it being this silo effect where you're able to go through and you've got to fiddle with and figure out, I almost cussed. You've got to go through, there's this other type of form where we can start to manage some of the same type of details that we expect from ITSM governance, but really look to start to empower some of the different teams. And what we did as part of whether you want to call it a proof of technology, a proof of concept, what have you, is we took the same type of service catalog, and so we use ServiceNow for our ITSM stuff. And what we did is we said, well, what's a request that somebody is wanting? For example, if they want a Linux server, but they need just enough Linux server with enough storage, with enough information, IP address, that type of thing. What about on top of that? I mean, do people need like an Apache web server, Apache Tomcat, or maybe Oracle, or Fuse, Service Mix, whatever those types of things are? And as we were building up this stack of cookbooks that delivered different components, so we're Chef Shop, we make use of Chef, that's why Target's here. Started to say, well, if we actually had a delivery mechanism that made it really simple and really easy for somebody to fill out just a couple of fields on a form, and we just delivered it to them, how about we tried that? And we were able to do, and actually some of the guys that are up front here went through and we were able to do things like make use of a CI pipeline that allowed us to collaborate with each other on how we could actually do things like deliver Apache, deliver Tomcat, and instead of it being 100 days or 170 days just to get a virtual machine with enough operating system and enough storage to be able to then put the request in to have somebody install software, we were able to do things down to minutes. And in some cases, it would be under 4 minutes where there would be a Linux server and it would have just enough of the security things that we needed, like from a CIS perspective. Internally, we call it a SCML. Be able to do that, deliver to the person an IP address, a one-time login, root password. They would have to change it immediately. Enough storage for them to do what they need to do, and then enough of the right software installed for them to be able to immediately start to deploy their app and test things out. But with the intent of it being sort of a lease. Like you can have it up to 180 days, and then we're just going to automatically decommission it. We're going to retire it. If you need one again, feel free to deploy it. And what we started to do with that then is we started to actually make use of community to help with different pieces around how we can actually improve that service and get it to where, now that I've erased it, we can go through the small iterations on how we improve. We literally took what was expected to be, a 2-day effort to try to get JBoss Fuse in developers' hands and repurpose some of the stuff that we had been working on and made it to where we were able to, using the community at Target, to get it down to, Josh, like 2 hours maybe? And that was just talking. So Josh Lindell's with Target, one of the people that did a ton of stuff on the JBoss Fuse. But made it to where within hours, developers were making use of JBoss Fuse instead of it being, let's have a meeting and figure out the planning session and figure out what our design sprint will look like. Design sprint? Anyone? No? All right. What we were also able to do is when we would find fixes in place from an ITSM perspective and say, there's this fix to this code, we could actually make use of some of these other tools to circle back with other development teams to make it to where instead of it being, I'm going to submit an incident or I'm going to submit a ticket, it's, hey, Nick is another person that works at Target and we're working on some things. It's the issue that you're experiencing and the reason that the pull request builder in Jenkins can't check your code is because we found this issue with Kitchen Vagrant. Kitchen Vagrant 16 blows up some of our stuff, but 15 works great. So this was actually on a pull request that failed. Pull request failed because of the same issue that somebody else experienced. Actually, I think it was me. Went through and said, do this to your gem file on your pull request. The PRB will do its thing, and we'll be able to get this thing right-tracked. This makes it really powerful because it isn't, I need to go and now submit a ticket. However, we're capturing the same types of details that you would expect from an ITSM governance perspective. It is, something's broken. What is it that's broken? Is it because it's a change? Is it because someone else has done something? And do we have a known issue or do we have a known fix for the issue? We're also able to start to drop some of the lead times. I called out Josh here in the front row on this case, and this is probably really hard to read now that I'm looking at it. It's just like squiggle, blah-bitty-blah. We had a Red Hat contractor on site, and it was, hey, we need to make some updates to that repo that you have that does some of the stuff with ServiceNow and makes things work and turn on. And I said, well, submit a pull request. Like, we don't need a meeting, just submit a pull request. Once you submit the pull request, we can go through and we can discuss via our GitHub Enterprise what's actually needed and make sure things are right. So they submitted a pull request. They didn't have stuff right. There were some tests that were missing. They were actually using some wrong switches for some commands. So we went through, talked it through, in probably about 20 minutes of deliberating online, we were able to go through it and have them submit inside of that same pull request an update, a fix. Pull request builder was happy. We were happy. Uptick the version, push the Chef server, everything's good. I bring this up because of the past experience that had this been, I need a change request, and then I submit a change task to the server team, the network team, the storage team, like our load balancing team, the SSL team, access provisioning team, janitorial services team. I thought I would get that one through. And we end up, if one of those had been rejected, the way that the process works is they all get rejected. So if you're the change request person, you're like, I need the email to say, Bob at target.com instead of John at target.com because John's moving on and Bob's taking over. It would have been, you had to circle back with all those teams to have them re-accept their change task because one of them rejected it. It's just it's so futile as far as to make that type of thing work. So people work around it. So the big thing on this one, as far as meeting the needs, looking at different ways we've been able to do things with the GitHub process, with Jenkins, with really our CI pipeline, and still have been able to capture those key things from an ITSM perspective, especially around the change domain, around metadata that's needed, who requested it, what's actually being changed, when the change is being implemented, how well tested is the change. That last one, it used to be, and this goes back many years ago. Has anyone filled out a change request like in HP Remedy or CMN or any type of homegrown, what have you, and there's just the checkbox, did you test it? And you're like, check. And like the thing went green, so it must be good. And as soon as you check the box, it's like, you don't need to go to CAB because you tested it. And you're like, damn right, I tested it. Check the box. Well, we would go through times where teams would submit a change request. We'd have a change task in different system, different time. And there was an expectation of these different Word documents. And the governance team was responsible for making sure that the Word document template had all the stuff in it. And I don't mean actually filled out, just had like the right column headers. But as long as the attachment was there and the change number was in the header, that was the only check against actually what it was that was being implemented, tested, backed out, what have you. So people wouldn't fill it in because there wasn't anything to stop the change from going through because I checked the box. I'm gonna take a sip. Sorry. So at Target, there's been a big push, probably in the last 18 months, and I forgot to hit start on my timers. I have no idea what time it is, but is leaning back on the DevOps practices. At Target, there's been a big push, really in the last year, but it dates back even probably 18 months, of a grassroots effort to look at how we can start to do things differently and start to improve and make use of what we now know and love to be these DevOps practices. And this is that third element of those ITSM outcomes around an appropriate mix of people, process, and technology. One of the key things that in the IT ops world that we do at Target is we really focus in on value streams, and we make use of the data that's in ServiceNow about the provisioning aspect to have an understanding of data-wise, where is it that we can actually start to put coordinates to understand what we can start to affect and have a really broad impact. And by that I mean, so if you imagine, and I think it was in today's keynote when James Casey was talking, and he had the, like this, so this is like quality and this is time. Does anyone remember this type of graph? Kind of up there as, and there's this notion then of if each of these squares, or as you're going out the XY axis, if each leg up is considered like it's 1-to-1, then you're optimizing that entire flow. So when you look at it and you take the perspective of, for me to move a cog, a widget, what have you, from a first station to the second station, to the third station, fourth, and so on, if the time it takes to move from 1 to 2 to 3, if it's consistent timing across the board, then I really have optimized that end-to-end delivery. Now I can start to look at where are areas that I can improve, but not so much optimize that one station that everything else is now affected. Where value streams come into play and where ITSM governance is really actually pretty handy is around capturing the data points about what it's taking to actually deliver the end-to-end state, the end-to-end delivery. So one thing within ITOps we've done is tons of value stream maps. And The next iteration is to actually expand that to say if there are common provisioning steps or there are common actions that we're doing across different areas, making sure that we're actually aligning those to focus on those areas that we actually do a lot, even if it is a very small savings that we'll see. Because I push back on folks, and I realize from today's keynote, we're talking velocity, we're talking speed. In an enterprise, there's probably just more friction points that come into play because of process than actually having to make things go faster. And that may sound counterintuitive, and this is just a kind of a generic value stream. But if you imagine there would be like 30 different steps to get that Linux server provisioned in Target today, and it's 170 days or whatever the total is. When we look at those and we start to see where we can shrink some of the steps down because we're actually just removing the queue time, not the work time, we start to take 30 days of work and shrink it down to like 15 minutes. And that becomes really important because we haven't actually done anything to improve the provisioning step or that provisioning task. We haven't sped that up, but what we did is remove the friction point of queue time from it going from one person or one team to the next person or next team, and made it to where it's more streamlined. A unit of work that comes in and moves on to the next station, it takes as much time to move to the next one, to the next one. So we're optimizing across the entire value stream. To expand that, when we start to see, for example, for access provisioning or having to provision service IDs. Anyone use service IDs for like your Tomcat server, or everyone just runs as root? Cool, everyone runs as root. Again, I can't see you, so I have no idea. But if it's something like I need to provision this one type of account on a lot of servers, and that's a similar step that takes place across like 20 different value streams, then there's a ton of value in going after that because then you've shrunk the queue time for all those types of value streams. And that becomes really important. That's one of a future iteration that we'll be going after when it comes down to value stream mapping. Another thing is the iterative process of CI/CD and going through and having an understanding of, when I talked earlier about everyone's got some sort of customer, and the customer is going to be able to define the success and failure. Going through and leveraging things like CI/CD to make sure in very small steps, in those small little waves of change, that we're on the right direction. We're able to change course and not put ourselves in a position where we're putting signs in the middle of a walkway that say, not a walkway. And I think the third thing here, I'm a big advocate over leveraging the use of patterns to identify what's needed to satisfy the pattern. And so for this, one of the, we get into a bit of a state where we sometimes put too much investment in a particular tool. For us, there were times where everything had to go into ServiceNow. And by that, I mean it was just like the business logic and all the different pieces of the workflow. And next thing you know, you've got this bloatware of trying to get one little request through, and you lose sight of it. Things go into a vacuum. They go into a black hole. But by going through and actually pulling some of these things back into intellectual property, where we're making use of some very basic Ruby scripts and open source tools like Service Mix to manage some routing, we're able to go through and do CI/CD on the full stack. And by the full stack, I mean when we talk about a ServiceNow request coming in, so for us, we have our catalog, and when I was given that example before of being able to deliver like a Linux server or an Apache server in minutes, what we have is we make use of an internal service, and it's called Expediter. Long story, but if anyone cares, I'll certainly share. Through Expediter, this is where we're able to put all of our business logic in. And with that, what Expediter does is it does things like it talks to OpenStack for us. It'll talk to Chef. And with this, we'll spin up, for example, a VM in OpenStack. We'll bootstrap it with Chef. We'll assign it a role. We'll gather the information, and then be able to post back details back into ServiceNow. Where this becomes really, really helpful from that whole notion of things not falling off into a black hole is that when the request comes through and we post things back into the catalog, into that specific request, because we know what the different steps are, and we've built the logic now internal with target intellectual property, as far as the business logic side of it, again, still open source as far as the different components. When we post back into the catalog, we treat it almost like a pizza tracker. Anyone order from a pizza place, it won't be named, that has like hey, your order's received, and now we're prepping it up, and now it's cooking, and it's quality, and it's on the road, right? But we have now this notion of, as we're going through and we're building these things, whether it be in OpenStack or bare metal, or we need to create an Active Directory group, we're able to post all those events back to the catalog, and the person that requested it can actually see what's taking place as things are rolling through. And if it errors out, we post, it errored, we're going to try again in so many minutes, sorry for the inconvenience, but now that it's not even a matter of them opening up an incident. In the past it's been, we're sorry it broke, or we're sorry we didn't get provision correctly. Please, welcome to my silo, please fill out a form for an incident. So recap, I think I timed it okay maybe. So recap, ITSM and infrastructure as code. Customer first on both sides of this governance conversation. Also, ITSM governance needs to be as much Kaizen as any other component of the IT delivery. Don't let it get stale. And then use small iterative changes to evaluate the progress of that particular, of the governance process at your place of where you work. And that last piece, it lets people, when something doesn't go right and we need to course correct, you can have really thick skin and realize, you know what, okay, we'll get that back on track with these small iterations. It really becomes helpful. And I think then that's it. So again, my handle, the Desktop Hero. Check out the Target booth in the expo. There are some positions and I think we have some stickers. We've got some stuff. There's also the Target Tech blog, which is target.github.io. And then we have our open source GitHub organization on the public side, where we have F5 cookbook that's been open sourced, as well as a Cassandra cookbook that's been open sourced. There's also some style guides and more stuff to come. So please reach out there. Also want to give a special thanks to, there's a project on the inside of Target called Infra-red, where a bunch of this stuff was done. And there were too many people to name out, but thanks to all those guys. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you. Open up to questions.
Thanks a lot, Jason. Totally have time for questions.
You briefly mentioned ServiceNow.
Yeah.
Do you have sort of integration with ServiceNow and Chef, or is that?
So the question being, like integration between ServiceNow and Chef?
Yeah.
Well, yes, but it's not directly. Up here where I have this box called Expediter. Are you a ServiceNow customer?
I would use the word victim, but yes, we do use ServiceNow.
So ServiceNow has this notion of an integration server, mid-server, message integration discovery, and that sits inside of our network, and it actually posts to this Expediter thing. An Expediter under the covers, it's service mix. So we use some Camel. We're making use specifically of the Blueprint DSL, so it's all XML, so it's easy to version. And what that does is that just says, oh, I've got a request from ServiceNow that says, I need to talk to OpenStack, spin up a box, apply a chef role that comes from and is defined in ServiceNow. Expediter manages the, hey, let me do a create, using like the FogJam knife commands, go through and create the OpenStack instance, apply the role during Bootstrap, and then manage and maintain that state. So it's not a direct, like ServiceNow doesn't know we use Chef. It just says, here's the Chef role that we want applied. What that allows us to do is, within Expediter and making use of roles, like when Shellshock came out, when Heartbleed came out, behind the scenes, we were able to update it just a few lines of code, and everything that's being built with Expediter was just updated. Either stuff that was a little more long-living or all new stuff. So it made it to where we were able to abstract catalog details, having to know, here's my Chef server, and it just says, nope, I'm just going to provide a JSON payload. I'm going to post it to a web service, and let that web service manage the Chef integration. Thank you for the question. I hope I answered it.
On the compliance side, do you have any monitoring in place to make sure changes are always, first approved in ServiceNow before, before getting to any system?
On which slide?
On the compliance side, every change, let's say if you are using ServiceNow, that's what we use, every changes get approved.
Yeah, are you familiar with the notion of standard change from an ITIL perspective?
Yes.
Okay. So what we did is we sort of changed up the order of operations, and we said, these are the things that we want to deliver as part of this form. And so we were able to get standard change because we had a standard set of offerings in this catalog that were going to be predictable and consistent. So when we were going to deliver a Tomcat server, it's going to be in a specific environment, in a certain location, with certain set of, certain operating system, certain version of Tomcat. And as we then collected things like the host name or the IP address, we would go back and in real time enrich back to the catalog, back to our CI or our CMDB, details about how we were building it in the act of building it. So we were actually able just to flip the order of operations to say, if we build it this way, can you just approve it and just have it be an automatic approval? So instead of it saying, well, I need this server and I need some storage and going through those steps, we said, these are the like 3 levers that people can change. And as long as they can only change those 3 things, any of those set of combinations is a standard change. Go ahead and ship it. So it's really changing the way we thought about what we needed to have an approved change. And it was providing lots of flexibility in a small area of impact. So
even new requests, if they fit in this pattern, you classify as standard changes?
Absolutely. Up to and including when it came down to doing Apache, Tomcat, Oracle. James Nielsen is another target person who has done tons of stuff on Oracle standalone as well as Rat Cookbook. We also then said, well, we actually want to make use of OpenStack's load balancing. I think somebody was waving at me, sorry. OpenStack's ability to do load balancing with HA proxy. And so we had in the form a checkbox that said, I want Apache, but I want it load. So what we would do is we would create multiple nodes, multiple VMs. Once we knew the information, actually create a pool, add the members as pool members, set up the appropriate ports, all as part of that standard change. So yeah, it was a matter of if you follow this pattern and you go down this path, this happy path, we'll get it to you in a few minutes, and we're going to do the standard change for you. And we took out some of the variability and made it to where it was a consistent experience. And folks from a governance perspective were like, let's do more of that. So it really made it an easier conversation.
The ITSM program over at Target, does it come out of like a traditional sort of like COBIT, CMMI sort of base, or is it mostly ITIL focused and kind of enforced by ServiceNow?
You know what's weird? I actually did not hear the question, so I'm not clear as to what it sort of sounded like it came from a tin can, but I think it may have just been where I was standing. Would you mind repeating it?
I'll ask it. All right, I'll try in a different voice. The ITSM program at Target, is it rooted in traditional ITSM frameworks like COBIT or CMMI, or is it mostly an ITIL implementation based on the constraints of ServiceNow?
Yes.
Oh, come on, dude. Give me a little more. Come on.
It's like a big scoop of COBIT and a sprinkle of ITIL. Honestly, I mean, it's a matter of there are certain people, certain teams that do certain things, and so we kind of follow that regime of
Okay, so it's like most traditional businesses where at one point it was probably a cohesive thing that made sense and looked like some standard, and then over time was morphed and beat and battered and eventually became a thing that's kind of custom to you guys.
Yeah.
Got it.
That sounds good.
Killer talk, by the way. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, I think we're out of time, so let's thank Jason, and you can find him at the Chef booth, I believe, after this.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.